The moment Barack Obama leaned forward and began to speak, the entire atmosphere in the studio shifted. The audience, both in the studio and those watching at home, could sense it immediately. This was not going to be a typical exchange of political barbs or rehearsed talking points. Obama's tone was steady, but there was a sharpness in his words, a precision that signaled he had come prepared with more than just opinions. He started by reminding the viewers that integrity and leadership was not just about appearances but about actions that stand up to scrutiny. As he spoke, he carefully unraveled a series of events, bringing forward timelines, documented reports, and even direct testimonies that connected Donald Trump to decisions that were not just questionable but deeply troubling. It was clear he had no interest in exaggeration. His delivery was measured, deliberate, and carried the weight of undeniable evidence. Trump, sitting a few feet away, forced a tight grin, nodding dismissively as if the entire exercise was beneath him. Yet his shifting posture and restless tapping on the desk betrayed a different story. Obama mentioned dates, specific days when Trump had allegedly authorized actions that bypassed normal checks, actions that seemed to benefit private interests rather than the public. For the first time, viewers weren't just hearing accusations, they were hearing a timeline constructed piece by piece, each block supported by evidence. Obama referenced reports filed by officials who had since retired, documents signed under Trump's administration, and internal memos that had mysteriously vanished from public record until now. The effect on the audience was immediate. Gasps filled the studio when Obama produced a copy of one such document, holding it up for the cameras to capture. The paper bore signatures, official seals, and annotations that matched previous leaks, leaving little doubt of its authenticity. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice, but his calm presence carried more weight than 1,000 accusations. By speaking steadily, as if every word had been tested and verified, he gave the impression of a man not seeking to score political points but to reveal the truth. That approach made his words land even harder. Trump interrupted several times, scoffing and waving his hand as though brushing away dust. He muttered phrases like fabricated nonsense and completely false, but the interruptions only seemed to highlight his discomfort. Obama didn't glance his way. He stayed focused on the documents, the facts, and the audience watching. He explained how Trump's dealings had created a shadow network of influence, where decisions appeared motivated less by policy and more by profit. He explained how these actions weren't isolated mistakes but part of a repeated pattern, carefully masked behind public distractions and fiery speeches. Each point drew the viewers deeper into the narrative, leaving them stunned at the sheer detail being laid out live. The contrast was stark. While Trump grew visibly irritated, leaning back in his chair with crossed arms, shifting his weight as if itching to get out of the spotlight, Obama leaned in closer, making eye contact with the audience, as if to remind them that this wasn't about political rivalry, it was about accountability. His steady voice carried through the tension, slicing through the noise of Trump's interruptions. Every time Trump raised his voice to call it a lie, Obama answered not with retaliation but by calmly unfolding yet another piece of evidence. As Obama continued, he spoke about how these actions affected ordinary people, the citizens who had trusted Trump to lead. He explained how policies altered behind the scenes led to financial advantages for a select few while leaving communities struggling. He spoke of contractors and small business owners who had been squeezed out of opportunities because deals were redirected to preferred allies. By bringing real people into the story, Obama moved beyond cold documents and gave the revelations a human weight. The audience wasn't just hearing about misconduct, they were seeing how it impacted lives outside the political bubble. Trump's reactions became increasingly erratic. He threw in accusations of his own, claiming Obama was obsessed with him, calling the entire thing a political ambush. Yet the more he lashed out, the more credibility Obama gained. The viewers could see the divide clearly, one man calm and steady, laying out facts without raising his voice, and the other resorting to loud denials without proof. The live feed captured every detail. The tightening of Trump's jaw, the sweat forming on his brow, the way he glanced nervously at the cameras when documents were shown. By the time Obama finished this part of his revelation, the audience had been taken on a journey from suspicion to clarity. They were not left with vague claims but with structured facts, evidence, and a leader who appeared entirely confident in what he was presenting. Trump, in contrast, looked smaller than he ever had under the glare of the cameras. It was no longer about opinion or personality, it was about truth laid bare, calmly, publicly, and unmistakably. The moment Barack Obama's revelations sank in, the cameras caught Donald Trump shifting in his seat, his composure cracking like glass under pressure. What began as dismissive chuckles and sarcastic hand waves quickly transformed into a full-blown display of agitation. His eyes darted around the studio, from the host to the audience, then back to Obama, as if searching for an escape route. The tension in the air became thick enough to feel, and before long, Trump erupted. His voice, already sharp, grew louder with every word, echoing across the studio in frantic bursts. He slammed his hand on the desk, his face reddening as he interrupted Obama's steady cadence. The audience, stunned by the contrast, sat frozen, watching as the former president's self-assured calm pushed Trump further into disarray. Trump's meltdown was not subtle. He leaned forward, jabbing his finger in Obama's direction, calling him a liar, a fraud, and accusing him of staging the entire moment for publicity. His words spilled out in an incoherent stream, shifting from claims of political persecution to threats of legal action against the network for even allowing such a segment to take place. The cameras caught every detail of his unraveling, the sweat glistening on his forehead, the quiver in his voice when his anger edged too close to panic, and the way his chair creaked under the force of his movements as he slammed himself back against it in frustration. Obama, in stark contrast, did not flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. His silence during Trump's outbursts seemed to frustrate Trump even more, as though the calm presence beside him was an insult in itself. The viewers could see the difference. While Trump grew increasingly frantic, hurling accusations in every direction, Obama simply waited, hands folded, eyes steady, letting Trump's storm rage until it burned itself out. It was a moment that laid bare the fragility of Trump's composure. For years, he had thrived in environments where he controlled the narrative, but here, under the bright studio lights, his inability to manage the pressure was undeniable. As Trump shouted, he turned to the cameras, appealing to the viewers at home. He claimed the entire ordeal was a conspiracy to destroy him, that Obama was fabricating documents and twisting facts for personal gain. But his arguments lacked structure. He repeated the same phrases, witch hunt, fake news, total hoax, like a shield, hoping repetition would replace proof. Yet each time he tried to regain control, Obama's steady presence undercut him. Trump's anger didn't come across as strength, it came across as desperation. At one point, Trump demanded the cameras be turned off, insisting the broadcast end immediately. The host, visibly uncomfortable but bound to the gravity of the live event, tried to calm him down. But Trump was past reasoning. He accused the staff of betrayal, threatened lawsuits, and shouted over both the host and Obama, his voice cracking under the weight of his fury. The audience inside the studio looked on in disbelief, murmurs rippling through the crowd as they watched a man once known for dominating headlines spiral uncontrollably in front of their eyes. Clips of the meltdown began circulating online before the segment even ended. Viewers captured Trump's shouting, his pounding fists, his wild accusations, and the way Obama sat composed, almost serene, beside him. The side-by-side comparison was striking. Trump, who had always prided himself on commanding a room, now looked small against the calm, unshaken figure of Obama. The harder he fought, the more he revealed his vulnerability, and the public could see it in real time. What made the moment even more shocking was that Trump's rage seemed to validate Obama's words. Instead of disproving or dismantling the evidence, Trump defaulted to his usual defense mechanism, attack louder, attack harder, and hope to bury the truth under noise. But the tactic faltered under the weight of hard facts. The angrier he became, the clearer it was that he had no real counter. The silence that followed each of Obama's responses only amplified Trump's lack of control. The host tried to pivot back to Obama, asking him to continue explaining his evidence, but Trump wouldn't allow it. He interrupted repeatedly, his voice cutting through, each interruption more frantic than the last. He accused Obama of jealousy, of being unable to let go of the presidency, and of plotting against him since day one. The irony wasn't lost on the audience. Obama had barely raised his voice, while Trump, who claimed to be the victim of obsession, was the one unraveling publicly. By the time the segment wound down, Trump's meltdown had overshadowed anything else he tried to argue. His anger consumed the stage, leaving behind an image that would be replayed endlessly, a man yelling at the top of his lungs, sweating under the lights, while the person exposing him sat unshaken and quietly resolute. What Trump failed to realize in that moment was that every shout, every slammed hand, and every insult was being broadcast unedited to millions, and those millions were drawing their own conclusions. What struck everyone most during that unforgettable broadcast was not only the information Barack Obama presented, but the contrast between the two men sitting side by side. The power of that contrast was impossible to ignore, and it became the defining element of the night. On one side sat Obama, his voice steady, his demeanor unshaken, his posture relaxed yet deliberate. On the other was Donald Trump, his body language betraying agitation, his voice climbing into higher registers with each passing minute, and his words spilling out in frantic bursts. The juxtaposition told a story of its own, one that required no additional commentary because the images alone painted the truth more vividly than words ever could. As Obama laid out his case with quiet precision, he never raised his voice above the room. He spoke in calm, measured tones, explaining documents, recalling events, and connecting threads that led directly to Trump's actions. Each fact was presented with a kind of simplicity that made it impossible to dismiss, as though he had rehearsed not for performance, but for clarity. Even in moments where Trump interrupted, shouting insults or claiming persecution, Obama merely paused, allowed the storm to pass, and then continued as if nothing had happened. That kind of composure drew in viewers, making them trust the weight of his words even more. Meanwhile, Trump's behavior provided the sharpest possible contrast. His responses weren't calm rebuttals or well-prepared counters, they were eruptions of emotion, raw and uncontrolled. He slammed his hands on the table, gestured wildly, and spoke over anyone who tried to bring order. His face flushed with anger, and his voice grew hoarse as he attempted to shout down not only Obama but the evidence itself. The more he tried to drown out the revelations, the more he appeared desperate, a man cornered by facts he couldn't escape. The camera angles captured this vividly. The tight shot of his jaw clenching, the beads of sweat running down his temple, the erratic flicker in his eyes whenever a new document was placed in front of the audience. Viewers across the country were quick to notice how these differences shaped perception. Clips began circulating online in real time, showing side-by-side shots, Obama calmly reading from a document, Trump exploding in anger, Obama explaining with ease, Trump jabbing a finger and yelling. The comparison was striking, not because of any clever editing, but because the contrast was so clear in real time. One man looked like he was speaking to inform, while the other looked like he was fighting for survival. The symbolism of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. For years, Trump had cultivated an image of strength, of dominance, of being the loudest voice in the room. But in this setting, his loudness no longer read as power, it read as panic. Obama's composure, in contrast, became a kind of quiet authority. Every time Trump shouted, it made Obama's calm presence seem even more unshakable. It was as though one man was on trial, flailing against the walls closing in on him, while the other sat as the steady hand of accountability. Even the host, who tried desperately to keep the discussion on track, became part of the contrast. When Trump would lash out, accusing the network of bias and threatening lawsuits, the host would glance nervously at Obama, who remained still, almost unbothered, as if he had seen this kind of storm before and knew it couldn't last forever. That composure stood in stark relief to Trump's visible unraveling, and it left a powerful impression on everyone watching. The aftermath of the exchange proved just how significant the contrast had been. Commentators who once avoided criticizing Trump's demeanor openly remarked on how unstable he appeared during the broadcast. Psychologists were brought onto news panels to analyze the body language, pointing out how Trump's aggression was less a display of strength and more a telltale sign of fear. Obama's quiet, steady tone was praised as masterful, an example of how calm can be more powerful than rage. But the true impact was on the public. Millions of viewers felt they had witnessed more than just a political clash, they had seen a raw exposure of character. For many, it wasn't only about the evidence Obama shared, it was about how Trump handled being confronted with it. The difference between the two men became a metaphor for truth versus deflection, composure versus chaos, credibility versus denial. Trump's inability to maintain control underscored the seriousness of what was being revealed, while Obama's patience and clarity made the revelations stick in people's minds. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, the story wasn't just about what Obama had exposed. It was about the contrast the nation had witnessed. People were left with the image of a leader who could remain calm under pressure, and another who crumbled the moment the pressure turned against him. That unshakable contrast lingered long after the broadcast ended, shaping the narrative more than any single piece of evidence could have. The broadcast might have ended in the studio, but its impact was only just beginning. As soon as the cameras cut, clips of the confrontation flooded social media. Within minutes, millions of people had seen Donald Trump shouting, jabbing his finger, and sweating under the lights while Barack Obama remained steady and composed. Hashtags exploded across platforms, news outlets scrambled to replay the footage, and by the next morning, the exchange had become the dominant story across the nation. It was more than a political skirmish, it felt like a cultural earthquake. Viewers reacted in waves of shock. Some were stunned by the depth of the evidence Obama presented, but even more were taken aback by Trump's response. Instead of addressing the claims, he had spiraled into anger and accusations, leaving many to question what he was trying to hide. Talk shows played the footage on repeat, analysts dissected each frame, and everyday citizens debated it at workplaces, in cafes, and across dinner tables. The moment had pierced through the usual noise of political headlines and lodged itself into public consciousness. Investigative journalists, fueled by Obama's revelations, began digging deeper. Reports emerged confirming that several of the documents Obama referenced were indeed authentic, and some of the witnesses mentioned were willing to step forward. What had been brushed off as rumor or dismissed as speculation now had a spotlight shining directly on it. Trump, who had always been quick to control narratives through sheer volume, found himself unable to silence the surge of renewed scrutiny. Every denial he made on his social media platforms only seemed to draw more attention to the very evidence Obama had calmly presented. The nationwide shockwave was felt not only among ordinary citizens but also within political circles. Lawmakers who had previously remained quiet were suddenly forced to address the confrontation. Some distanced themselves from Trump, uneasy with the spectacle of his public meltdown, while others doubled down in his defense, echoing his claims of conspiracy. The divide deepened, but one thing was clear: the broadcast had shifted the ground beneath everyone's feet. Obama's intervention had reignited conversations about accountability at the highest levels, and the contrast with Trump's behavior made those conversations impossible to ignore. For Trump, the fallout was immediate and brutal. Late-night hosts ridiculed his meltdown, splicing clips of his shouting with Obama's calm replies for comedic effect. Editorials in major newspapers described the moment as the clearest unraveling of Trump's public image to date. Even allies privately admitted to reporters that his behavior had been unhelpful and out of control. Trump, however, leaned into his rage, firing off posts filled with capital letters, calling Obama a traitor, and accusing the network of treason. Yet every word he typed seemed only to validate what viewers had already seen: a man unable to stay composed when faced with truth. The ripple effect stretched far beyond politics. Ordinary Americans who had tuned in expecting another routine exchange of political blows found themselves unsettled by what they had witnessed. It wasn't just about corruption or policies anymore, it was about character. Parents discussed it with their children as an example of how truth and calm could stand taller than anger and noise. College classrooms analyzed it as a case study in communication and leadership. Even apolitical viewers who usually avoided debates admitted that the broadcast had drawn them in, leaving them with images they couldn't shake. Obama, for his part, remained quiet after the appearance, refusing to add fuel to the fire. He did not tour talk shows or celebrate the viral success. His restraint only heightened the power of the broadcast itself, as if the words he had already spoken were enough. That silence contrasted sharply with Trump's relentless shouting into the digital void, further underscoring the differences that had been on display. The public perception tilted further: one man looked measured, the other looked frantic. As the days passed, the broadcast became a turning point in conversations about Trump's legacy. Analysts argued that the meltdown had weakened his credibility more than any scandal before it, not because of the allegations alone but because of how visibly he had failed to handle them. For years, Trump had thrived on controlling chaos, but here, under the lights, the chaos had consumed him. People remembered less about the shouting and more about how small he looked beside Obama's composure. By the end of that week, the confrontation was still dominating headlines. Investigations gained traction, debates raged on, and citizens remained glued to updates. The shockwave had not only unsettled Trump's image but had also reignited a broader demand for accountability in leadership. For millions, the broadcast was not just another political fight, it was a revelation of character, a moment where calm truth stood against loud denial and left the louder voice diminished. When the dust settled after that unforgettable broadcast, the nation was left grappling with more than just another heated political exchange. What had unfolded live was something far deeper, a rare, unfiltered glimpse into the character of two men who had once held the highest office in the land. Barack Obama's calm and steady delivery of evidence had not only revealed troubling truths, but also demonstrated a kind of composure that resonated with millions. Donald Trump's furious unraveling, by contrast, became a mirror reflecting his inability to withstand scrutiny when confronted with facts he could not easily dismiss. The images of that night lingered, burned into memory, because they captured something more enduring than politics. They revealed the essence of leadership under pressure. The days that followed only amplified the moment's significance. Conversations in homes, workplaces, and public forums kept circling back to the stark contrast people had witnessed. For many, it became a lesson in how truth and composure have the power to outweigh bluster and rage. Obama's decision to step forward, not with insults or dramatics but with documented facts and measured words, shifted the narrative in a way no headline or opinion piece could have. He had reminded people that leadership was not about who could shout the loudest, but about who could stand firm in the face of chaos and still remain grounded in clarity. Trump's response, meanwhile, stood as a cautionary tale. His meltdown showed not only his inability to counter the evidence, but also his instinct to rely on anger as a defense mechanism. To many, this wasn't just about political disagreement, it was about watching a man reveal, in real time, that his strength had always been built on noise rather than substance. His inability to meet facts with reason exposed a weakness that had long been hidden behind spectacle. For millions of viewers, the meltdown didn't just weaken his words. It reshaped their perception of him entirely. The broadcast, replayed endlessly across networks and social media, became more than just a viral moment. It was a turning point, a collective awakening for a nation often fatigued by political drama. People weren't just entertained, they were reminded of the standards that leaders should be held to. Calm, evidence, and accountability had been put on display against chaos, denial, and rage, and the comparison spoke louder than any campaign slogan ever could. In the end, what lingered was not just the evidence Obama presented or the rage Trump unleashed, it was the lesson embedded within the clash. Leadership, when stripped of theatrics, is defined by how one reacts under pressure. Obama's composure illuminated that truth, while Trump's unraveling underscored the cost of failing to embody it. The night marked a shift, a moment where millions saw clearly what had long been debated. That truth, spoken calmly and with conviction, can stand taller than any wall of denial, no matter how loud it